We are seeing panic shopping in Greater Brisbane despite pleas from Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. There are still lines out the doors of some supermarkets with people again hoarding toilet paper, pasta, rice and other non-perishables. As we go to air tonight, the entire city of Brisbane is preparing to lock down for at least 3 days after 4 more cases of community transmission were detected. Residents will have only 4 valid reasons to leave their home. More than a year into this pandemic and state premiers are still panicking and enforcing draconian restrictions instead of finding a targeted, proportional response. With the exception of Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales, state leaders have been quick to shut down their cities, close their borders and enforce mask mandates, forcing people to be muzzled even when outdoors in the open air.
If people could all please get out those masks that I know you have. Stay home for the next 3 days until we can work out how much community transmission there has been.
Traditionally, they're a raucous affair.
Prime Minister, you are wrong.
A chance for Labor Party faithful to thrash out key policy.
When Middle Australia looks at those images, they will say, that's not us.
Now, for the first time, the Labor National Conference will go virtual this Tuesday and Wednesday.
Well, it's going to be unique.
Following the lead of Joe Biden's Democratic convention in Wisconsin. 400 delegates due originally to convene in Canberra for a 2020 conference that was cancelled by COVID will this week dial in for take 2.
There will still be an excitement online in people's lounge rooms.
And this time you'll actually have a mute button.
Despite there not being an online opportunity for protests or outbursts that frequently characterise the conference.
Will you please stop the Adani comment?
Senior Labor figures reject the virtual format means it will be much more sanitised.
The voting is actually going to be much more forensic.
The usual show of hands will be replaced by an online count, but Labor elders say don't expect the usual fireworks.
The lead up to this conference is much smoother than what some of the ones that we've seen in past years.
At the last conference in Adelaide in 2018, Bill Shorten's policy platform was more than 300 pages. This time, it's just 110 pages.
A tight policy document gives maximum flexibility to Anthony Albanese.
Insiders expect battles on toughening the stance on China, trade deals and the role of gas, with the outcome binding on a future Labor government.
And the secret to a successful ALP conference is finding a set of words that everybody can be comfortable and support.
While there's a formal agenda, usually behind closed doors, the left and right factions meet separately to thrash out amendments.
It's not going to be as easy to do, but it will happen.
As it stands, the factions are tightly balanced.
When no one quite knows who's going to win on the floor, that always drives the extra incentive to try and make sure that everybody can look like they've had a win.
Everything is a little bit up for grabs.
With a federal election on the horizon, Anthony Albanese, aware that chaos and conflict at conference could provide ammunition to the coalition, potentially blocking his path to the prime ministership.
I think there is, relative to other conferences, a very strong unity of purpose.
Labor figures argue any flashpoints should be viewed as a source of pride.
No other political party in this country has such an open conference to their policy making.
We've got a heartbeat here. I mean, there is an internal discussion and we embrace that.
Most in Labor want this virtual gathering to be a one-off.
This isn't how you would prefer to do it.
But I think it's going to be a really interesting experiment.
Trudy McIntosh, Sky News.
Also in the news today, the latest news poll results. Somehow the coalition improved its primary vote and Scott Morrison has a 20-point advantage as preferred Prime Minister, despite a fortnight of relentlessly poor coverage from a partisan media obsessed with one issue. But it seems voters understand that twisting real concerns about workplace harassment and violence against women into a partisan issue is not going to advance the cause of women, nor is the hysteria and hyperbole. The latest news poll data shows that most voters can see through the activist media's determination to tie societal ills and toxic behaviour in Parliament House to just one side of the political divide. Coalition MPs would be breathing a sigh of relief today, but they shouldn't get too comfortable, for there's no denying The Prime Minister has botched his response to this issue. And though he leads opposition leader Anthony Albanese 52% to 32% as preferred PM, his personal approval rating has dropped to its lowest point for a year. The two-party preferred vote remains at 52-48% in Labor's favour. However, Labor's primary vote actually dropped to 38%, while the coalition's increased slightly to 40%. As long as Anthony Albanese is opposition leader, then Scott Morrison will be feeling pretty secure in his job. Albo is Morrison's greatest political asset. Who knows what the polls would be showing if the PM was facing a competent opposition leader who doesn't get his political cues exclusively from Twitter. Labor's latest policy idea may be opportunistic, but it is better than many of their previous efforts. Albanese is essentially looking at rebranding Tony Abbott's paid parental leave policy and giving parents 26 weeks of leave at their normal salary, including superannuation. It is unclear whether both the mother and father would qualify for this largesse, but at the very least, the primary caregiver would be able to stay home with their child for 6 months on their full salary. When the Abbott government proposed this policy, the most practical, pro-woman policy imaginable, the modern feminists from the media, academia and commentariat were quick to find fault with it. Not because it was a bad policy or because it failed to sufficiently be pro-women, but because Abbott had proposed it. Watch that same mob now champion Albo's policy proposal. Mothers should receive their full salary when on maternity leave, but businesses cannot afford to give 6 months leave to both parents. Only the primary caregiver should qualify. We have just emerged from the worst recession since the Great Depression, and there's more pain to come, with both state and federal governments accumulating enormous levels of debt, unprecedented levels of debt. Jobs, energy prices, and reopening the country and economy are top of mind for most voters, not the Canberra Press Gallery's obsession with workplace harassment and conduct. While the nation's media are preoccupied with the Women's March, we have entire sectors of the economy on their knees and a major city being locked down again over a handful of COVID-19 cases. We have state premiers from Victoria, South Australia, Queensland and West Australia continually shutting their borders and imposing harsh restrictions rather than coming up with a nuanced response to the COVID-19 threat in Australia. And we have a vaccine rollout that started late and is proceeding at a glacial pace. These are the issues that matter to the electorate and will ultimately determine the next election.